Dawn, my credit card is up on my desk. Just have fun. No, for me, today is kind of a deja vu moment because I got to be part of the panel last year that spoke. And when you stand up here and you look out and you kind of understand the companies and the lives that are represented in this room and see people that are willing to spend, take off work to be here, to invest, to say, how do I leverage this big part of my life, this work life, in a way that, can shine? As Chris said, how do I do that? It's kind of, I don't know, when you think about that and you're up here, you go, wow. And I had the same feeling last year, and standing back here and watching the discussions and everything, I have the same feeling this year. But it's also a kind of, that's the deja vu moment. There's another feeling that is a little bit different this year, because this year, God called my bluff. And if you know my story, you'll know what I'm talking about. If not, let me give you a little background. So almost a little over 20 years ago, I moved to Lynchburg to help lead an engineering company. And I took that was a big step for me out of the government world. And I got to get part of a team that was very small, but just the most talented, creative engineers. And we solved some really cool problems, and I thought that's what I would do. I loved every minute of it. In fact, a couple of the guys are here today with me that have been on that journey. And I thought that's where I would be until God nudged me. I'd been doing that about 7 years, and God nudged me and said, hey, I want you to take a step, a different step. And I was like, oh, no, that's not what I want. It's not in my career path. But he said, I want you to take a step onto a staff at a local church. And I'm like, no. But the more I prayed, the more my wife and I prayed, the more I had to say yes. And so that started the next 15-year journey of my life, which was part of this church. And I got to, again, not deserve it, but get on a team with talented, committed, the people I got to serve with, and I've been able to serve with these 15 years, could rock any company. In fact, they are top caliber people. And I got to play and struggle and argue and win with them. And I got to see just countless lives changed, more than I deserved. I got to see marriages put back together and people kind of recover from addiction and just find hope and go on to give that away. And then about a year and a half ago, God nudged me again, and he said, I need another step for you to take. And my wife and I were talking about it, and she said, yeah, I'm feeling God's nudging us. We have a different step in our journey. And that step was out of full-time being on staff back into the marketplace. But if you're on staff somewhere, let me just tell you that having ministry experience on your resume 15 years is not the most attractive thing to people looking for a job. Like, they're like, really, we're gonna hire a preacher? My boss gives me enough sermons already. I don't need a professional in here. I mean, that's what most people are thinking when they read that. Like, no, thanks, pass. And so I'm like, okay, God, what does that look like? Where do I go now? And I didn't know, but here's what I did know, and here's what I've learned. I've learned that if God is kind of nudging you, and if he's saying there's a step, then he has a place for that step. I just didn't know where. So that started a new part of my journey. One of the guys that teaches here, our senior pastor, Woody Torrance, he talks about following a cloud. And he gets that not from, the cloud, which we're all used to, the cloud, not that cloud. He's talking about the cloud, a cloud. And he takes it from Exodus, from Moses' journey, helping the Israelites, leave Egypt and go to this new place. God didn't really give him a plan. He just said, hey, I got a process I want you to do. I want you to follow a cloud. I'm gonna give you a cloud, and it's gonna go, and when it goes, you go with it, and when it stops, you stop with it. So learn to follow the cloud, which is a great, lovely philosophy, and we've kind of done it around here. The only problem was, my world looked like a nice summer day that was a cloudless sky, right? And I looked for clouds and there was no cloud. And I kept looking for clouds and I couldn't find a cloud. And I kept staring, and that went on for months. I'm like, okay, God, I'm willing to follow the cloud. Just bring a cloud, But it was like a perfect, day in California or something like that. I don't know. And he said, wait. Well, if you're type A, waiting is not your number one skill set. They don't hire you to wait. They hire you to get things done, right? Well, I'm not really good at waiting. But one thing God has taught me about waiting is there's two types of waiting. There's passive waiting, and I'm not good at that, but then there's this thing called active waiting. And the Bible says, those who wait upon the Lord will renew their strength. The waiting that he's talking about is an active waiting. It's kind of like when you're waiting to scare somebody, you know what I'm talking about? And you're like waiting for them to come around the corner and you're being really quiet. That's what I'm talking about waiting. That waiting, that ambush kind of waiting. It's kind of scanning. I think the guy said having your head on a swivel. It's kind of that type of waiting. So God says, wait. I've got something. I've got this new step, but wait. And so I waited. And I waited. And I waited. Because I really was saying, God, if you're nudging me, you'll show me where. And my wife was getting frustrated. We would talk about this. She's like, so you're not going to send out resumes? How's that going to work? And we waited together and prayed. Well, what I've learned about waiting, it's like I said, waiting isn't passive. If God's asking you to wait right now, that means he has timing when he's going to have that cloud appear. There's a timing thing. So what he's asking you to do is just be faithful where you are right now. If you feel that there's a change coming and he's saying wait because it hadn't come yet, well, what he's saying is wait, but be diligent doing what I've called you to do until I've got something new for you. So that's what I did. I waited. I talked to the leadership around here. I told them what God was doing. I said, God, I believe is calling me and my family back out to the marketplace. I don't know where, but I want to be faithful until that day, whenever he shows me where it is. And so that's what I did. Well, one major part of that waiting was this business on mission. And I got to be part of what God was building here. So we came out of the last year's conference and everybody's excited and everything. And then we're like, now what? And so a couple of us that had been involved in kind of the creation, we got together, we had some marketplace experience, and we said, well, what if we could create a workshop? What if we could take a place where it's great for that day, but how about living this out? Could we create something like that? So we spent a couple months kind of thinking what that would look like and what kind of materials and what we could expose people to. And so that's what we did over the fall while I'm waiting. Well, first of the year comes along, and we decide we're gonna kick off a beta group. So we decide we'd invite some people in, and we got about a dozen people or so, and they came, and we walked through what we thought what it would look like. Here's some practical how-tos. And we got really great feedback. We divided them into two groups. Joe took a group, I took a group. We led them through there. And we watched people take this living on mission to their own workplaces. And we started to hear stories about how they were changing and things like that. We did the breakfast. If maybe some of you guys went to that, the breakfast up, at LU at the Snowflex. And we thought, well, we'll send this up. We'll ask Buck Jacobs to come back. And maybe we'll get 50 people. Man, we sold that thing out. There was like 92 people or something like that there. So it's obviously God was continuing to do stuff. So I'm still waiting. I'm not sure what to do. Now I'm getting very restless with waiting. Like, okay, God, I'm ready to, I don't know. And we decided we'd do round two. And so Brentwood did a round. They kind of went through it, and we got great feedback from them. So then we did another round of this, and we took some of the people that were in the first round, and they led some of the tables. We had 4 tables, and we heard more and more stories out of it. And more, people actually saying, I'm doing this now. I'm experiencing. And so that's great. But I'm like, that's great, God. What about me? I'm still here. I'm getting restless, And so I think God knew that. And so he had a guy that was helping me with that, Joe. And Joe talked to his boss and told him my journey. And so he texted me one day and said, hey, would you get together? Do you want to talk? Because my boss is kind of interested in your journey. And so Andy and I got together, and we met at Panera. And we both were really clear, this isn't an interview. And it was the coolest thing, because really, he told me the journey he was on, and I told him the journey I was on. And we weren't sure where it was gonna go, but we both walked away more excited about this business on mission, about what could happen. And so we said, I don't know what's going on, but let's get together again. And we got together. And what was so cool, that every time we got together, we both came away more excited about what it could look like. So let me fast forward. In early June, I said yes to stepping out of here and stepping on with their company, Moore's Electrical Mechanical, what you've heard of. And actually, in all transparency, today will be my third week of full-time there in that. So I am just stepping into that culture. They've graciously let me come in. What the challenge is they're already pretty healthy in so many ways. How do you help them to go to the next level? But that's what I'm getting used to, because God's like, you talk a good talk up there on stage. Let's see if you can walk it, boy. That's really what I feel right now, if I'm honest. And so when the team came back and they said, hey, Dave, would you do a session? My desire, and what I've seen played out today, and what our team's desire, was to make today as practical as possible, to give you as many snapshots of what it's like to live this out. And so when they asked me, Dave, what do you want to talk about? That's what I want to do. I want to expose you to what God has exposed me to over this last year, and this whole, where I think a next step may be, if you really want to take a step. And so I want to give you I'm going to show you two things for the remainder of my time. And those two things are two pictures of what I have seen, where I have seen people move and take steps. And I think that maybe for you, or where you're at, it may be a next step for you. So I'm going to start off with that Business on Mission small group, that workshop that we did. And I asked two of the people if they could come and share their experience. Because if you're like me, you're skeptical. When a guy stands on stage and it's his group and he's telling you about it, you're like, yeah, right, you're just selling me on it, you know what I mean? But what if I could hear from them? So I just grabbed two of them and said, hey, could you come and would you share it with me? So if you would give a big hand, Tracy and Andy are gonna come on board right now. Thank you guys for doing this. So I'm gonna start with you, Tracy, and tell us, a little bit about who you are, what you do, kind of where do you spend the majority of your week?
My name is Tracy Gallahan, and I work for First National Bank. I am in the business of mortgage banking. Been there 16 years, been a banker for 28 years. I am originally from the state of Maine. So this was a big culture shock for me, and I have come to really realize how much of a blessing it is.
Cool. So you started, what even made you think about taking this Business on Mission small? Did you lose a bet? What was the reason that you took the workshop?
Well, Joe actually contacted my husband, who's a competitor of his, but a very good friend, and said, hey, how about you and Tracy come along on this study? What do you think? And honestly, being very transparent, and I know there's some people in this room that I know, because I'm always transparent, I do not want to go on missions outside of the United States. So I thought, wow, I can actually do something that's business on mission and stay right where I'm comfortable, in a sense. But it actually stretched me outside of my comfort zone, which is a very good thing. But I really wanted to do that. And of course, Blue Ridge was doing a Business on Mission teaching series. And I saw the Air Force video, and I was hooked. I probably would have been very good in the military. But I just really was hooked. And just the idea of, I manage 5 people, and that doesn't sound like a lot, but really to get messy in their lives and to do it right, I couldn't do it by myself. I think I'm a good manager, but after this, I think I am what I would consider what God would say is pleasing as a manager.
So you were going into this, so you took it, Joe kind of recruited you. Joe's in sales, of course. So he got you to come. What were you thinking you were walking into?
Not sure, actually. I knew we would know Joe, and so that was a good thing, and I know his mom, so he was already familiar. And of course, we come to Blue Ridge, so we're extremely familiar with that. And not really sure, but very open, because I was really excited about the teaching series and thought if it was anything like that and I got an opportunity to go deeper, I really wanted to see what that looked like.
Okay, so how did it turn out?
Amazing, actually. Surprisingly, I loved the different things, the different mediums, but I would have to say the biggest takeaway was you and Joe being very transparent, very real with what that looks like. Like, being honest, it's tough. You know, it's hard. It's kind of scary to be bold about your faith. It's one thing to be, bold about who you want to see win the Super Bowl in conversations with work, but it's a lot different to be bold about your faith. And so that was a big deal. The other thing I really liked was our table leader, Chuck. He was not, when you think of a table leader, you think there's somebody who's proficient, probably got an edge, got it down, and he came alongside of us. He was never in front of us.
Yeah, he was just part of the journey. Hey, I'm learning how to do this too, because Chuck had been in the first round. I think Chuck's here. Where's Chuck at? Somewhere around. There's Chuck right there. Yeah, Chuck had been in the first round, and we're all figuring this out together type deal. Yeah, okay. So you put pause on that, and so this is...
I'm Andy Moore, from Alta Vista, married, got 3 young girls, and currently get to serve as the president and CEO at Moore's Electrical and Mechanical.
i.e., this is my boss, okay? So I may not be employed more than 3 weeks. If this goes bad, this is what we're going to say. But yeah, Andy, the first question people may have for you is, why would you ever hire a preacher? But we'll hold that for later. But tell us about why you took the class.
Well, I guess probably going back a little over a year ago, and talking to Joe and hearing about the Business on Mission conference, and even just a little bit before that, it was a real stirring, I felt like, in this area with meeting Greg King at C12 and a few other relationships that kind of transpired along that way, and then coming to the conference. And like you said, you left the conference excited, feeling the urge to do more, but just not real sure what that looked like. So kind of 6 months or so went by. The breakfast came around, attended the breakfast, which was great. Buck is, he's just a great mentor for all of us when it comes to marketplace ministry. It's just amazing the heart he has. But coming to the breakfast, and then when I walked out of the breakfast, Joe said, talk a lot about Joe today, right? I mean, that guy,
yeah, exactly.
He's in trouble. But he just said, hey, next step is we got a small group starting up. Would you be willing to come? And of course, the first thing I said is, I don't have time. But, I also thought that's what the enemy wants us to say. So yeah, I'll do it. I'll lean in and I'll be there.
So what were you expecting? What kind of expectations did you have walking into it?
So I was talking to my wife about this last night, and I remember clearly the first Wednesday. So we did this for 6 weeks in a row. So the first of 6 weeks, I'm getting ready after dinner to head over here to Blue Ridge. And she said, so what are you going to be doing? What are you going to be talking about? And I looked at her and I said, I have no idea. I know that God is calling us to be disciples in the marketplace, and the conference last year was a starting point. The breakfast was a building block, and this is going to be our next step. And so I leaned in, and that's kind of what my expectation was. I wasn't real sure.
So how was your experience? So you had a different small table than she was. So tell us about good, bad, how did it work?
Yeah, so I probably wouldn't be up here if it was all bad, but it was really an amazing time. And we talked about different subjects for 6 weeks, but the 3 that stood out to me the most were, A, building a trusting relationship. You got to earn the right to be heard, so you can't make people projects. And I know that we should understand that, but just walking through what it looks like to build a trusting relationship was the number one thing that we learned. Number 2 is learning how to tell your story in a non-threatening, non-religious, very brief kind of way. That's something we don't practice very often. I mean, I can count on one hand probably the number of times I've told my story or my testimony, and that's not something we do. So we worked through that as a group and kind of got some feedback in how we do that. And then the third week that really kind of put it all together was watching Jeremy's layout of the bridge, and many in here are familiar with that, but if you know Bible stories, you know about Adam and Eve and sin and the gap and how we get all of that. And so to me, that was for the first time the light bulb went off about how to step out there and share the gospel with somebody to where I know that they can connect with it. And so those 3 weeks out of the 6 weeks were the 3 that really, brought it together.
That's great. Now, tell me, Tracy, what has changed or what has happened in you and your workplace or the way you're different afterwards? What have you been able to apply? Tell me about that.
It may sound real simple and easy, and I'm just going to say I'm not as fast. I've slowed down. I've looked up. Sounds like, well, that's all basic stuff, but it goes a long way to not being so task-driven. I'm in the business of making profit for my company, and I manage people to help bring that out in them. So there's an enormous amount of pressure with that, but that should be my pressure, not the pressure I exhibit to my team, to my people, to my clients, everybody I come into contact with. So I'm slower, I'm more intentional. It's one thing for me to know what's inside my heart, but if I'm not exhibiting that on the outside, then I've failed. And so I've slowed down, and I'm really very intentional.
Good. I think one of the speakers today talked about being aware of those moments that you have and that they come by and they're excelling in that relationship. Yeah. Now, Andy, you kind of had this thing kind of pushed you to a new place they had an experience with that. Tell us about that.
The story with,
Yep.
Yeah. So I guess it was just a few weeks after the last small group meeting. I had a guy that works in our business coming to meet with me. And I'll preface this story by saying this guy's name has been showing up in my prayer journal since August of last year, okay? So if you look through there, his name's in there just many, many times. But I knew he was coming to see me, and I was really interested in what this conversation was going to look like. So we sat down in my office, and I just listened to him. And basically, he said, I'm in a great spot, but I'm still just trying to find that joy. I'm still just searching for that happiness. And as I listened to him, I just started thinking to myself, I know what you're looking for because I've been there. I know what that circumstantial happiness looks like. And so I said, can I just share with you my story? And so right there, I was equipped to be able to step into that. And so he's like, yeah. So I shared my story and just talked about circumstantial happiness and contentment, and then the joy and peace that comes through that relationship with Christ. And so he started to understand that. And I said, I tell you what, can I draw you a picture? And so when we walked through the small group, they said, man, you ask somebody if you can draw them a picture. They're rarely going to say no. So I said, can I draw you a picture? And he's like, yeah. So I grabbed a sheet of paper off my desk and I started walking through the bridge with him. And I said, you've told me about going to church, so you know Bible stories. So help me walk through this thing with Adam and Eve and sin and the gap and death. And I said, we got the cross here. We know what Jesus did on the cross. And he was walking through all that. And so we got through it, and he just kind of sat back in his chair. And I said, so here's the deal. I said, if you want to walk out of here and process this, I understand. If you want to sit right here and pray over this, I'll be glad to do that too. And so we sat right there in my office a couple weeks after the small group. He received Christ, and it was just something that God could have God could have teed that up however he wanted. But I know for a fact I would not have had the skills and the tools and the boldness probably to step through that like I did that day without going through a small group.
Fantastic. And guys, can we put up on the screen? I think that's a sketch. He faxed it, he texted it. That's a sketch of that day that he was like, hey, after going through that, now I kind of feel like I can do this, right? So it's really cool. So I saved that text because I got that one from Joe. That's the other name you'll always find here, Joe. We manage culture and Joe are the two words we say the most. But anyways, so that is great. So guys, what would you say to somebody that is thinking about this, considering it? Why should they? Why not? Just last thoughts. What do you think?
I guess I would sum it up by saying, if you talk to anybody who thinks, well, I'm a good person, that's their rite of passage into heaven, we know that's not biblically at all true. And so I would say that, you can be a good coworker, you can be a good manager, you can be, good with your clients, but is that what it's about? I mean, we're very fortunate where we live, and we don't even have to say we could live in a third world country and not be exposed to Christ. I came from Maine. Never once did we pray at any business function. Within 2 months of being down in Virginia, I was at a business event where we prayed. And I cried because I was like, wow, this is something. But that was probably the first time I ever really started to realize what I thought was a relationship was nowhere near a relationship. And everywhere I was getting it, but was I giving it back? So, again, I've been with my staff who have lost parents, lost children, had marital strifes, financial problems, and it looks a whole lot different after going through this. I've always been a bold person, but not so much with my faith in rooms that I'm not sure of the temperature. And now I go with gentleness, respect, and by all means, I earn the right. And earning the right is really coming alongside with people for a long time, and that was a big thing that came out of this. So for those of you who are already here, there's a certain level of commitment and buy-in already. I mean, it's different than going out on Ward's Road and trying to get a bunch of group of people to go out and do God's work. So you're already, I would say, sold on the idea that you want different. And for me, I did. I wanted it to be different. And, I pray with my staff. I cry with my staff. I actually cry with clients. I pray with clients when that house didn't happen. And I'm like, it's not the house God had for you. I have helped engaged people who are buying a house and ask who's going to live there till you're both are married together. It's just different. And so, honestly, the tools that are here, and I'm going to tell you, there's nothing hugely magical about it. What I would say is the magic is being able to sit around a table with people and go, this is kind of hard stuff for me to talk about. I'm not always sure what that needs to look like. Where am I lazy? And people were really honest about that. And just to hear people's story, work on how to tell our story. It was just phenomenal. So I would truly encourage you, and there's a lot of women here, and more than there were in my study. I was one of two. So I would obviously encourage women power to come. I would say, as much as I was only one of two women in the class, both Brad and Chuck were extremely gracious at my table. I would like to think I brought a feministic approach to it, at least. But honestly, as much as it's going to be beneficial for other people, I will tell you it's hugely beneficial for yourself.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Andy?
Yeah, so why wouldn't you lean in? I guess, again, I've heard multiple people up here today talk about where your heart is at. And so, we work to support our families and to live, but at the end of the day, I feel like we're all called to a greater mission. And this room's been full 2 years in a row, and the breakfast here in Roanoke. And so if your desire is to live your faith out in the workplace, then lean in and give this a try. You won't walk out of there thinking you could have done something better with your time. I think about what Doug said last year at this conference, and being able to live your life, whether you're at work or whether it's at church, and not having to differentiate between that is such a freeing and liberating life to live. Because I know for me, it was many, many years of being one way on Sunday and not two-faced, but then when you walk in the door on Monday, it's like you feel like you have to be or you've got to be different. And now to be able to just be yourself and live that out for Christ 24/7, 365 is just freedom that is unlike any other. So I think that this small group helps get you there.
All right. Hey guys, let's give them a round of applause. Let's thank them for this. Thanks guys, very much. Thank you. So just to let you know, I think we have a slide. We are starting our workshop here at Blue Ridge on October the 9th. It'll be Mondays. It's 6 weeks. If you want to sign up, we only got like 30 spots. But even if you're from another church and you're saying, well, I'd like to take it to my church, that's great. Come, be a part of that. We want you to try it here. Brentwood, I think you guys are kicking off one later on in the fall sometime. They're kind of getting the details of that down, but they'll have one there. So guys, sign up. That's your landing page. You can go there and sign up, but it's going to fill up quick if this is something that you would like to do. We'd love to have you. All right, now, again, like I said, I'm going to take you on the journey God's taking me. So in May, I got invited to go to the Drive Conference in Atlanta. North Point puts it on every couple years, but it's kind of their leadership strategy, how they do stuff. Well, one of the tracks I got to take was kind of the business on mission. What are they doing? And I met a guy there by the name of Doug Hurley. And Doug just impressed me both with his heart and his journey. And we just started talking a lot of stuff. And they've got some tools and some things that they're doing that I thought we should hear about because I think it may be applicable to some of us where we are on our journey. So if you wouldn't mind, give Doug Hurley a round of applause. So Doug, thanks for coming. He came up all the way from Atlanta last night, and I think he's driving back tonight, right?
Going back tonight. Yep, got 3 kids I got to put to bed here tonight, so.
Exactly. Well, Doug, thanks for coming up. I really was impressed when I sat in yours and then kind of was able to connect with you before I left town, and we've been able to talk. But I know with your journey, just hearing a little bit about it, you would never expect your journey to have ended you up in a stage in Virginia. So tell us a little bit about how you got here.
Yeah, so I was a skeptic many years ago. I was in the marketplace. Specifically, I was in the Army. This is May of 2002. And so far from God, so far from church, from Christ, from all that stuff. And there I am, I'm laying in my cot in a tent next to my buddy Chris, who was a believer. We had been in that unit together for 4 years. And anyways, we're there, and Chris is reading this book. And I'm like, hey man, what book you reading? And he goes, oh, it's this book by John MacArthur called Battle for the Beginning. And keep in mind, John MacArthur, who's a famous pastor and theologian and author, I had no idea who that was because I was the skeptic and the agnostic and just didn't know anything about that. So I said, yeah, Chris, so what's this book about? So he starts telling me about the book, and do you like it? Yeah, it's pretty good. And what's it about? He gives me kind of a high-level thesis. So long story short, Chris was smart enough to know that I was smart enough to know that he's reading a God book because it's Chris, and Chris just walked a Christian walk at work for the 4 years that I knew him. And so by me asking him those questions, really I'm inviting him into a conversation about the God that he believed in. So in his mind, Chris is kind of doing cheetah flips that the resident atheist or agnostic is asking him questions about this John MacArthur book, but really I'm inviting him into a conversation about God. And the reason that I'm doing that is because for 4 years he had been invested in me and walking a Christian walk and loving me and being patient and not judging me and just a great guy. So if you go back to that video that we showed about an hour and a half ago, he built trust. That first threshold, going through the 5 thresholds, he built trust. We had a trusting relationship, and then I started getting curious, and he was the guy that I asked. 18 months later, I ended up coming to Christ back in Kandahar, Afghanistan, December of 2003. So that's about 18 months after him and I had that initial conversation. That conversation got me so curious about God and the Jesus he talked about. Started doing my own research, reading more books, Purpose-Driven Life by Rick Warren, praying on my own, reading the Bible, and finally back in Kandahar, Afghanistan, December 2003. I'm like, all right, God, I'm giving this up to you, and let's do this. So.
Okay, wow. And so you know those thresholds of faith because you lived it out. But how did you get into this marketplace ministry? Okay, that's that, but why this?
Yep. So then, after that, just got on fire for God. Ended up leaving the military in 2005. Went into the business world, and just on fire for Christ. Ended up going to seminary. Hands down, the dumbest guy in the class. I mean, I'm sitting there in like a systematic theology class, and the professor would say, "Hey, turn to the Gospel of John, and let's talk about that. And so I'd be looking over at Dave, who's sitting next to me, one of my peers, and saying, okay, where's he turning in the Bible? Is it in the front of the Bible or is it in the back of the Bible? But hands down, just the dumbest guy in the room. But went through seminary, just started getting on fire, still in the marketplace, and just started doing exactly what Chris did for me back when I was in the Army, and he was the guy that was building trust and doing evangelism, if we could use that word, but just doing marketplace ministry and workplace evangelism, and I started doing it like Chris. So eventually, just got so passionate about that. North Point, the church I work at now, they had an opening for this position to come and to help quarterback the marketplace ministry. So that's how I got there.
All right. So what are you guys learning? I mean, you guys have been on this journey for quite a few years now. So what are you learning? What's some truths, what's some avenues you file or you help people kind of traverse into? Talk to me a little bit about what you guys are learning.
Yeah, so I'm a pretty simple guy, going back to my days in seminary, right? Where's that book of John in the Bible? But I put just about every marketplace ministry or workplace ministry in one of two buckets. So bucket one is we're trying to reach people that don't know Christ and trying to help them to get to know who he is. Bucket number two is we are discipling disciples. Both are hugely important. What we're doing at North Point is really trying to reach the people in bucket number one. We're trying to reach the person who had never stepped foot into a church. Because if you think about the skeptic in the marketplace, the de-churched, the unchurched, the angry at church, the atheist, agnostic, Hindu, Buddhist, Jewish person, they're not gonna step foot into a Blue Ridge Community Church. And there are exceptions to that, but generally speaking, they're not gonna do that. So what we're trying to do at North Point is really focus on bucket number one. And bucket number two is hugely important, and big fan of that. But what we're trying to do is bucket number one focused. And so with that, we really try to create environments in the workplace, small group environments that are safe and practical and engaging for those coworkers who don't know Christ.
Okay, now, what would an environment like that look like?
Yep, so we have small groups all over the world. We've got hundreds of groups all over the world where there is a Christian who is working wherever he works, big corporate company or small private company, but he and or she or them, they're there and they're trying to create a small group environment where they host a lunch a couple times a month. And in that lunch, they show a short message from the senior pastor of my church, Andy Stanley. And it's a short 27-minute curated message that's just a really good message on biblical principles, but there's a lot of great life application. And Andy Stanley, I think, does such a good job of kind of letting the skeptic, not buy into everything that you and I believe in. But it's showing that 27-minute message at that lunch, and then the marketplace ministry person, the Christian who's working there, who's hosting the lunch, is really just trying to create that warm and safe and practical and engaged environment. So I've got one of our leaders is in the back of the room. His name's Jeff. He traveled up with me from Atlanta. But Jeff does such a great job of doing this. And the way he would do it when he's with all of his coworkers is, hey, I'm so glad you're here today for this lunch. I hope you enjoy it. We're gonna watch a message from a church pastor. Don't be freaked out by that. It really doesn't matter what you think about church. We think you can get some really good life application out of this, and we think you're gonna get better at life. So enjoy your lunch, enjoy the message, let me hit play. 27 minutes later, Andy's done talking, and it's a super light, simple, non-churchy wrap up. Hey, Andy talked about breathing room in your finances and how to create margin with your finances. I've got 3 kids at home. They're gonna be in college before I know it. I need to talk to my wife tonight. How do we create some breathing room and some margin to help pay for their college? So that's what I'm gonna do tonight is go home, have dinner, talk to my wife about that. Hopefully you have a takeaway and you can go home and talk to somebody or talk to me. And if you got any questions about that or where I go to church or anything else, come and see me. Otherwise, thanks for coming. See you in 2 weeks. Yeah. And that's it.
All right, so there's some not to-dos that I'm hearing you say a little bit. What we don't do. So tell me what you don't want to have happen in those groups.
Yeah, great question. So what we don't want to happen is we don't want it to turn into churchy prayer time, all this churchy language like justification and salvation and glorification and words that I love and you love. But if we're really trying to be the bottom rung on the ladder for the skeptic that we work with in the marketplace who's never going to step foot into a church, then we just got to really sanitize that environment. And to be totally candid about everything, I want discussions happening and I want people asking questions about sanctification and glorification and justification, but I want the skeptic to approach that leader. So Dan from the video, Dan was the skeptic in the video, going up to Jeff and saying, hey Jeff, got a question for you. Well, first of all, thank you. Thanks for this this thing that you're doing every 2 weeks in the free lunch, grateful for the food. That Andy guy is pretty good. I like the message he gives. It's really applicable and it's relevant and it's safe. He does talk a little bit about Jesus Christ. What do you think about that? And that's when Jeff's like, well, gosh, close the door. Give me 15 minutes. Let's have a cup of coffee. Let me tell you how Jesus Christ has changed my life. Jeff's not trying to win any theological arguments. He's just sharing his story and just walking through his story. And at the end of that, he may say, well, why don't you come and check out my church? We got a great message on Sunday at Blue Ridge Community Church. Come and check it out. And if Dan the skeptic says, yes, man, that's fantastic, that's a win. But even if he says no, it's still a win. Because the fact that Dan the skeptic went up to Jeff, has been coming to this meeting every 2 weeks for 6 or 7 months, goes up to Jeff and asks him a pretty heavy question. What do you think about Jesus Christ? Man, that is a win. That is spiritual growth. God is working on Dan's heart, and that's movement.
So we're talking about a continuum here. And so what I'm hearing you is this is a way that you can kind of create an environment to kind of cultivate a little bit of an avenue for people to have spiritual discussions, kind of like what Andy was saying happened in his office or whatever. Like, hopefully it gets there, but this is not what you're trying to convert anybody. It's add value to their lives. It's kind of create an avenue where they can hopefully start a conversation, maybe offline or something like that. But hopefully that's going in congruence with a lot of what we saw today here, which was, this is how you earn the right to be heard. This is how you shine. This is living a life that is thing. Here's a practical way, because that's what a lot of us, that's what we struggle with. Like, okay, I want to do that. I just don't know, I don't have a vehicle. What do I just start a conversation? And you guys have said this has worked. How long have you been doing this?
Yep, we've been doing it for about 14 years. We've got hundreds of groups around the world. We've got hundreds of leaders that are doing this. And really what happens, on that day that meeting takes place and there's the free lunch and the 27-minute video of Andy, people walk away and there's a value there. But the most important thing are the 14 days in between that. And the most important thing is Jeff, the leader, who feels equipped to have that conversation when Dan the skeptic walks into Jeff's office and says, hey, what do you think about Christ? And we've got all these resources and equipping that we do to try to empower Jeff and pour into him and give him pastoral care. We've got a bunch of resources, but hands down, the most important thing that's happening is Jeff and what he's doing. And there's nothing I can say that hasn't been said today. It's our walk. Chris said it, a while ago. It doesn't matter what you say, it's what you do. And then once you do it and people see you walking that Christian walk, then they care about what you say. And it goes back to my own personal story with Chris. 4 years he invested in me, and there were other guys in my unit, in my military unit, that were, they were Christians, and they probably had the same theology as Chris, but man, they were trying to just crack a Bible over my head. And they would say things like, not do you want to go to church, but you should go to church. And that was offensive to me, and it was a repellent, and I went running in the other direction, or I tried to go toe-to-toe with those guys and would try to win an argument, which a lot of times I did. But with Chris, it was just building that relationship and building trust and just walking him walk a Christian walk. And he was just patient and loving and kind and a good leader. And so finally I was just curious, and so I went up to him. With the leaders that we have doing the marketplace ministry that we do all around the world, that's what those guys are doing.
All right. So if I'm sitting out here and I'm going, that sounds like something I might want to know a little more about, or what do we do? I think we have a landing page that you have that you gave me. Is that the place that they would go, or tell us
Yep.
Tell us how I'd find out more if I wanted to know.
Yeah, great. Thank you for asking. So you can go to this. This is a landing page, like Dave said. On there is, I think we've got a couple things that were framed up on that. One is there's a webinar that we're doing next Friday, and we'll walk through all the details of what this looks like to deploy the marketplace ministry that we have. So you can go to that, you can sign up there. You can also just schedule a one-on-one time with me or somebody on my team at North Point, and we'll have a conversation with you. We want to walk you through all those concerns that you have about doing something that is pretty bold and courageous. How do you go into the marketplace? I can't remember who it said, if it was Chris or Derek or somebody said, it can be dark out there in a secular business world, and it can be a little nerve-wracking to go out there and face persecution because you're being bold to try to reach the unbelieving folks and talking about Jesus. So, but we want to walk you through all that. How do you talk to human resources? How do you talk to compliance? How do you get this approved? How do you avoid those compliance landmines? How do you have those conversations with unbelievers and do it in a way that's safe and attractive and non-threatening for the atheist or the skeptic or the Hindu or the Buddhist? So anyways, you can do the webinar, you can sign up and have a conversation with us one-on-one. Jeff, who is one of the leaders I talked about, and myself, we're gonna be outside. We got a table out there. We'd love to answer any questions you have, but the bottom line, this is free. We just wanna give this away. I mean, I came to Christ in the marketplace because somebody was that marketplace ninja who was loving and patient, not judgmental. So I'm passionate about it. Andy Stanley, who's my boss, he's super passionate about this. The vision of our church is to be a church that unchurched people want to attend. So we just want to give this away.
Yeah. All right, well, why don't we thank Doug and for being here and making the trip. And so, yeah, appreciate it. Let me stop. I want to pray for Doug and what's going. So would you join me? God, I thank you for the way you're moving in the body of Christ. I thank you for what you're doing here today and the number of people, but I thank you for Doug and what he gets to be a part of. And I know there's a lot of business people that go to North Point and other of their churches and sister partner churches and things like that. And so God, I just pray for guidance for them. I pray they could be a resource that will be something that people can really, apply. And so give them wisdom and strategy and a safe trip home. And so thanks a lot. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Thank you, brother. Thanks, guys.
Okay. All right. So guys, that's kind of possible next steps that we wanted to give you. And so if there's more you want to talk about, that's great. But I'm going to invite Jeremy now. And Jeremy is going to close us up for today.